This may be the most important single slide you will ever see in your life in any presentation, right here. Because what this is doing is describing how we as human beings actually create our reality. Not in the New Age, secret sense, but in the real world, feet on the ground, spirit and flesh sense. Information, available information, all the components that you need to assemble to make sense of anything. If you look at these white lines here as just being a simple representation or a model of truth, which does not waver, which is just the way things are, the actual truth of the matter, and then you look at these waveforms in different colors as a person's perceptions and how the perception is coming into contact with truth at these points. This is called a low frequency wave. A low frequency means the wave oscillates about its axis less frequently than a higher frequency wave. So a low frequency perception or consciousness is going to be in contact with truth at much lower frequency, less frequently. This person, their consciousness has been stepped up to a higher frequency. It is now in more alignment with truth. So the person's consciousness is intersecting with that which does not waver much more frequently, hence a higher frequency. This person's consciousness is intersecting with it at many, many, many different places along the line. If you were to take that and go to infinite frequency, you would have a line, or in other words, alignment with truth. That's what determines whether consciousness is low or high, whether it is in alignment with that which is, in recognition of that which is or not. Some people live their entire lives and barely ever touch that white line at all. But the point here is that perception is not reality. What our work here on the earth is to align our perception to reality. And an ideology that makes this almost impossible, that unfortunately is on the rise and is propagated non-stop 24 hours a day by the New Age communities in today's world, is known as solipsism. Solipsism comes from the Latin adjective solus, meaning alone, and the Latin pronoun ipse, meaning self. So if we put them together, it's all alone by oneself. I'm the only one here, in other words. Okay, everything revolves around me. All right, it's the ideology that only one's mind is ever sure to exist. That knowledge of anything that's outside of one's mind is unsure. You know, I can't possibly know that any objective truth exists because I'm only experiencing my consciousness subjectively, which is why dark occultists want to propagate this ideology. Solipsism is both a false religion and a defining hallmark of spiritual infancy. Departing from this diseased ideology is a surefire sign that you're beginning to awaken. It's a surefire sign of the very beginning of human maturity and spiritual development. Those who are truly awake fully understand that objective reality absolutely does exist and that the truth absolutely can be known. The universe was not put here to torment us endlessly such that we can never know anything and constantly be tormented by that fact. If that's your worldview, it's a diseased and poisoned worldview. Being awake means knowing the true self and understanding its connectedness to everything. We are all one. That doesn't mean there's not individuated units of consciousness that are experiencing themselves in physical form, but essentially in our situation and in consciousness we are one. So let's look at what consciousness means. To know the self, you have to understand what it means to be conscious. All right, so consciousness is, when we say he's conscious of that, this person has a high level of consciousness. This person isn't conscious. They have a low level of consciousness. What do we mean by consciousness? It is the ability of a being to recognize patterns and meaning with respect to those patterns that are taking place, both within the self, within their own individuated consciousness or self, and in the realm in which the self is operating, the environment that they're in. Consciousness is awareness. It is the ability to accurately align your perception to what is, to see the pattern, to see the meaning in the events that are taking place. Consciousness's expressions are threefold. It's through our thoughts, our emotions, and our actions. We are three in one. We are a three-in-one being, and these are the three aspects of the self. It has been called mind, body, spirit. The thoughts, of course, are the mind. The body we can look at as masculine. It's what we perform action with, the masculine component of consciousness, doing something in the world. It's an active expression. The spirit is something that is internal. Okay, you can look at that as feminine. It's within. It's what we are experiencing within ourselves, the spirit in which we perform our actions. Moving forward, to help people to understand what is the true self, we have to understand a little bit about the physiology of the brain. We basically have three complexes in the human brain. We have the R complex of the brain, which is down here, highlighted in red. This is the reptile brain, the reptilian brain. It's the brain stem and the cerebellum. This regulates motor function, respiration, survival mechanisms, instinctual responses, the things that we have to do to interact with the physical world around us. Then we have the midbrain. It's known as the limbic system or the mammalian brain, the mammal brain. And it facilitates and makes possible emotional responses in the body. This generates the chemicals, the neuropeptides that help us, that go into our bloodstream and nervous system that help us feel when we take an action or have a thought. And then there is the higher brain. This is the part of the brain that is actually the most important and the most important to keep in balance and health. It's called the neocortex, which means the new brain. It facilitates all human higher order thought and separates us from the animal kingdom in that regard. It makes logic, scientific, mathematical thought possible. It also makes intuition, creativity, artistic, holistic, compassionate thought possible. The neocortex of the brain has two hemispheres. The left brain hemisphere largely facilitates logical and scientific thought. And again, I say largely, while the right brain here facilitates creativity and compassion, emotion, intuition, etc. So what happens if we're only living in our left brains? If we're chronically engaged in the logical, scientific, mathematical, linear type thought, and never really turning on the creative, intuitive, or compassionate thought that is facilitated by the right brain hemisphere. Well, something happens. The whole neocortex starts to become destabilized because it's not in a state of balance. So if a human left brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the R complex of the whole brain construct will take over the executive function of the whole brain that is intended to be controlled by the higher brain, the human brain, the neocortex. Emotions will become suppressed because the right brain isn't working, and the limbic system will not work as effectively, and the person will become ruled by total selfishness and base desires, and they will develop a personality that is based in domination and control. What happens if the opposite is true? What happens if we're always living in the right brain and we never engage the logical processor that filters information and weeds out logical inconsistencies? Well, what we'll get is the opposite modality of thought. We'll get what I call slave think. If a human being's right brain hemisphere becomes chronically dominant, the limbic system will take over executive function of the brain instead of the neocortex. Okay, because the neocortex is imbalanced, so it reroutes or shunts executive function to another construct of the brain. In this case, the midbrain, which controls emotions. Our complex will basically shut down. That's what controls our instinct and survival mechanisms, our fight and flight response. Defense and survival instincts will become suppressed, and the person will be ruled by their emotions and develop a personality based in submissiveness and naivete. If both brain hemispheres are in balance, what develops is what I called free think. When they're in balance, the neocortex operates in its proper role as the executive command center of the whole brain. And that's where true intelligence is born. Intellect is not intelligence. Intellect is half of intelligence. The other half is the generative capacity. That's why it's called intelligence. Intella is intellect, gens is the generative capacity of the brain, or in other words, the creative capacity. The word generare in Latin as a verb means to create. So the creative capacity of the brain is what the right brain hemisphere makes possible. Intellect is largely facilitated through the left brain. Left brain intellect is not intelligence. Unfortunately, most of humanity is trapped in what I call the mental schism, where they're totally imbalanced toward one brain hemisphere or another, and that imbalanced dynamic is held in place through mind control. Knowing the true self is about getting out of those mental schisms. You're not in one of those forms of imbalance or the other. The truth lies in the balance point, in the middle. Knowing, and this is part of knowing who we are, because we are part of this universe and how it works. There is a deterministic component to reality, and that is what I term natural law. So natural law is operating at all times and places, but so is free will. So what is the true self then? Knowing who we really are. If we're in that state of consciousness, we will understand and respect self-ownership. We will respect our own sovereignty. We will know our own sovereignty as an absolute, unwavering truth of reality. And we will also know everyone else's sovereignty. The true self understands natural law, and they strive to live in harmony with it at all times and places. The true self understands what real non-dualism is about alignment with your thoughts, emotions, and actions. It means you're not in dualism. As you think, so you feel, and then so you behave. The three are in one. What we care about on a day-to-day basis acts as the driving force of our thoughts and our actions.